He's made up this world where he can be the star athlete, the quarterback, he can be...
Chuck Norris?
Last night, we lost a true icon. One of the guys that helped define the 80s and the 90s when it comes to action movies, the whole American symbolism, and just genuinely being one of the good guys. And I am talking about the legendary Chuck Norris. For a lot of us, Chuck Norris wasn't just a movie star. He was a person who marked the time. He tied memories to you and usually your dad or someone like that you shared those movies with. And he was a absolute legend of action movies. Not the biggest star, not the biggest movies, but if those movies were on, then you were going to watch them. And your dad was definitely going to watch him if he was like mine. Chuck Norris was my late father's favorite action movie actor, and he absolutely loved him, just like millions of people across decades who loved Chuck Norris. Even those that didn't grow up with his films know the legendary memes and Chuck Norris jokes because he is synonymous with just that masculine, tough energy that came out of the 80s, the whole America hell yeah vibe, and faith, family, all of that is all tied up in Chuck Norris. And today we are going to look at my top 5 favorite Chuck Norris movies of all time and pay tribute to one of the icons that we just lost. So Chuck Norris, like I said, he wasn't the biggest star. He was a Canon Films icon. He became synonymous with Canon Films in the 80s, just churning out movies. He was one that Canon Films could count on to always bring in the eyeballs and bring in the cash when those movies came out. His movies were always on TBS, TNT, the USA Network, always on VHS. He was in so many of our households for so long. He became part of your life and part of your core memories if you're into movies and you grew up around that time. And then later on in the meme era, you might have got introduced to his movies by the great jokes and stuff that way. And it just shows you the staying power of people like Chuck Norris and the movies from that time. So today, this isn't really a ranking so much as it's movies that defined the Chuck Norris experience for me and probably a lot of you too. And while there are a lot of great movies of his, you could go back to his first introduction with Bruce Lee in The Way of the Dragon. Great, where he played basically a twin of himself, I think, in The Octagon. Code of Silence is one of his biggest, like, serious film roles. I think it's really highly rated on Rotten Tomatoes. All that stuff is fine. This is a personal list to me as my favorites and why. And the first one is Silent Rage. Now, Silent Rage is very different for Chuck Norris in a way because it felt like he was stepping into a horror film, and I'm a big horror film fan. So when I watched this movie, this was almost to me like Chuck Norris taking on Michael Myers, and I loved that. So as a kid, that made it feel more special, more intense, seeing Chuck kind of in the horror genre. You've got this unstoppable killer and an eerie tone, and then you drop Chuck Norris into it, and he's the only one who can stop it, and that's what makes it work. He plays it straight, no wink at the camera or the audience, no jokes, just his calm, controlled presence going up against something that feels evil and wrong, very much like Michael Myers. It's one of those movies that you probably caught maybe with your dad, your brother, something like that. You caught it on late night TV or cable, and then you felt like you were watching something a little bit different, almost horror, but it had Chuck Norris, which made it even better. And then you have one that's going to be controversial. It is Sidekicks. Listen, this one hits differently for me because I think I was just around a teenager or so when this came out, and it kind of felt like a Chuck Norris movie for us kids, and kids like me who loved movies and action heroes. This was like that sort of fantasy playing out for you. You have Jonathan Brandis, who's daydreaming about Chuck Norris, his action hero, in action fantasies. And if you grew up watching these movies, you could identify with that, whether it was Chuck Norris or Arnold Schwarzenegger or Sylvester Stallone or Jean-Claude Van Damme, the icons, you could kind of associate with that. So it made perfect sense. And then when Chuck Norris actually shows up in this movie, it almost feels like a crossover event. It's not about being the toughest. It's about just wanting to be like something and aspire to something. And I think Chuck Norris made a lot of people want to aspire to something. Sidekicks, just a fun movie that ties me back to Chuck and my childhood and my dad. Absolute classic for me. And then, come on, there is the Delta Force. You can't talk Chuck Norris without talking about the Delta Force. This is like peak Chuck Norris energy, dad movie energy for this one for sure. This one was in constant cable TV rotation, TBS rotation, USA Network rotation, anything rotation. The Delta Force was on there. It came on, usually at least caught part of it. He had cool, larger than life missions, the awesome motorcycle scene, the coolest motorcycle ever, with gadgets and James Bond style bombs and everything else. And again, he plays it, like, if you look back at it, he plays it very serious. There's no irony. It's straight up good versus evil, heroes versus villains, and Chuck Norris right in the middle of it. He famously said he sees a lot of movies now with gray area, and you don't really know, it's an anti-hero, you don't know who to root for. And he's like, I come from an era when the good guys were the good guys, and you rooted for the good guys. You can root for me. I rooted for Chuck Norris. This is one that you have to respect, the Delta Force. Now, the next two are super personal and super specific because I probably remember watching these two the absolute most with my father, and that's probably why they're my favorites. And number two is actually the one I probably remember watching the most with him, but I watched number one a ton with him, and I love both of these movies. They're just Canon era energy, and the first one is Missing in Action 2, The Beginning, which we always watched way more than the original Missing in Action, and this is Chuck Norris in just pure unstoppable mode. You got a simple premise. They mess with the wrong guy. They mess with America. They mess with American POWs and soldiers, and he is going to fix it. And what makes this movie stick is that they didn't overcomplicate anything. You knew exactly what Chuck Norris was. You knew what he stood for. You knew when things went bad, he was going to walk right into it and step on some necks, as my dad would say. I love Chuck Norris. These movies, seeing him come up out of the water in the Missing in Action movies, like, this is a confidence, a Canon Films Era, just explosive action film. And Chuck Norris, quiet, kind of tough, silent confidence, just made the film Missing in Action 2, one that I watched with my dad more times than I can count. And then finally, number one for me is Invasion USA. This one to me defines everything about Chuck Norris. And these two were probably the ones that I watched the most with my dad. It is Canon Films energy to the extreme. Invasion USA is pure 80s action insanity with Chuck Norris at the helm. Explosions, one-liners, absolute chaos. Filmed here, mostly in Georgia. They blew up actual houses around here that were going to be demolished for Atlanta's airport expansion. And you've got Chuck right in the middle of it, barely reacting, basically like mythic in this thing. And it's like magic what it creates here, because everything around him is going crazy. He's in complete control. They've made the mistake. They have decided to invade America, the bad guys, and they didn't count on Chuck Norris. It's always rewatchable. whether you watch it with your dad or someone else, this is just a movie that encapsulated everything that Chuck Norris stood for, America in the 80s, that whole ideal that is so meaningful. Invasion USA, #1. And here's the thing about Chuck Norris. He wasn't just an action star. I mean, he was part of the time. Maybe he was always overshadowed by Stallone and Schwarzenegger, who I love, man. They're the top of the pantheon for me. But back when it wasn't about algorithms and what just came out, it was about what was on. It was about what you were exposed to, about what you grew up with, about what you connected with and shared with your dad, your parents, your uncle, your brother, your family, whatever, sitting on the couch, flipping channels, landing on a Chuck Norris movie, and just staying there. So yeah, last night we absolutely lost a legend. But those movies and those nights that we remember, they don't go anywhere. Heroes may die, but legends live forever. And Chuck Norris was an absolute legend. And if you grew up with his movies, you know exactly what I mean. I want to know what you think, what movies with Chuck Norris that you remember watching so much. I also want to take this moment to say my condolences to my mom because her best friend in the world, Lori, also passed away last night right there along with Chuck Norris. And it's always tough when we lose these icons that we grew up with and that we love and feel like they're a part of our lives. And it's very much a whole other thing too when you lose someone who is genuinely a big part of your life on a day-to-day basis. Both things are profound. Both things are to be remembered and respected, and God bless both of them on their way home. Thank you so much for everything that everyone contributes while they're here and that they leave us with. The memories last forever, and that's what I have for you this time. God bless. Be kind, rewind like always, and I'll see you real soon. Bye-bye.